Fred Harvey Hitchins. His undying devotion to the preservation of military aviation history, encouraging and inspiring future historians, has been of paramount importance in documenting and explaining Canada's aviation heritage. Fred Harvey Hitchins was born on July 10, 1904 in London, Ontario. He attended the University of Western Ontario, London, earning his BA in 1923 and MA in 1925. He graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with a PhD in history, then joined the faculty of New York University in 1928, where he taught European history. He was deeply interested in aeronautical history, particularly the Canadian operations of the First World War, and was publishing articles on the subject as early as 1931. Fred Hitchins married Beatrice Jones in 1931, and together they raised 3 children. His hobby of photography left many photos of his children as they grew. One of his favorites was the annual Family Pyramid, the first in 1936, and others showing the family in 1939, then 1940. Hitchins returned to Canada from New York in 1940 to join the Royal Canadian Air Force. By this time, he had written a detailed record of the careers of the aces of the Allied and enemy air forces and compiled a collection of about 350 books and thousands of notes on aviation history. After training at Brandon, Manitoba, he was sent to England in October 1941. For 2 years, he worked with the British Air Ministry's historical branch in Wales, where he monitored RCAF reports and collected information about Canadian flyers of the First World War. He also began to lay the groundwork for his History of the RCAF. In 1943, Fred Hitchins rejoined his family in Canada and continued his work at Air Force Headquarters. The first volume of an RCAF battle history was published in 1944 as The RCAF Overseas, the First 4 Years. He was promoted to Wing Commander in 1945 and appointed Air Historian in December 1945. In the final year of the war, he drafted the text of the RCAF Overseas, the 5th year. Hitchins' dream was to compile a comprehensive history of the RCAF. This massive undertaking would cover pioneering military flights, Canadians in the First World War, the peacetime between wars, and the RCAF wartime operations. Freed at last from military censorship, it could deal with the political and administrative aspects of the force as well as the purely operational. Unfortunately, his dream was not to be. The Minister of National Defence, the Honourable Brooke Claxton, had been instructed to reduce post-war defence spending. He decreed that all work on wartime histories cease as of April 1948. Although the Army and Navy branches managed to save their historical sections from disbandment, successive chiefs of the air staff showed no comparable interest. From 1947 to 1954, the office of Air Historian survived on a virtual shoestring, Hitchins and 1 clerk typist. From 1954 until his retirement in 1960, he seldom had more than 1 person working with him. In spite of these handicaps, Hitchins' indomitable spirit kept the candle of historical memory burning as he struggled to preserve RCAF records. The establishment of the Rondell as a service magazine in 1948 gave him some outlet for his energies, even as he completed, almost single-handedly, the 3rd volume of the RCAF battle history, the RCAF Overseas, the 6th year. As Fred Hitchins' family continued to grow, so too did his accomplishments. In 1948, he composed the first history of Canadians in the Battle of Britain, among the few, plus a chronology of RCAF history, the RCAF Logbook, published in 1949, and followed by 2 supplements that brought the story up to 1959. He drafted histories for use in RCAF schools, from basic training to staff college. He answered queries about service awards, squadron histories, and battle honors. All the while, he was encouraging units to continue submitting semi-annual historical reports and preserving the mass of wartime records that he never had time or staff to catalog. In 1954, the RCAF finally approved the concept of a multi-volume service history, but gave no added resources other than 1 officer. Hitchins began writing a scholarly history of the interwar Air Force, which he completed shortly before his retirement in 1960. It was subsequently published, not by the RCAF, but by the Canadian War Museum. Hitchins assisted civilian authors in writing about RCAF history. The help he gave to Leslie Roberts, for example, resulted in a book titled There Shall Be Wings, which broke new ground in popularizing stories about the Air Force. During his career, Wing Commander Hitchins amassed a treasure trove of carefully tended documents, some of which survive in his beautifully legible handwriting, covering such topics as military honors and awards, aerial victories and losses, interwar Air Force personnel, and Canadians who had enlisted directly in the British Royal Air Force. Fred Hitchins reached retirement age in 1955. His photo album showed one last family pyramid before his beloved Bee died. Between 1955 and 1960, his military service was extended repeatedly in an ad hoc manner. In 1960, at the time of his retirement, his successor paid him generous tribute when he wrote, "When Wing Commander Hitchins is formally retired in July, the RCAF will lose an officer who is undoubtedly the foremost authority in Canada on the history of military aviation. It would be regrettable if an effort were not made to preserve in some way a link with this talented man." His successor had suddenly realized that Fred Hitchins was not easily replaced. In spite of his efforts to secure the services of the air historian, at least part-time, Hitchins never returned to military service. Nevertheless, his influence continued in advice he gave to aspiring authors and inspiration he provided to the founders of the Canadian Aviation Historical Society. Beginning in 1960, Fred Hitchins served as professor and chairman of the history department at his alma mater, the University of Western Ontario, for 10 years. He devoted his spare time to his library, one of the finest private collections of aviation history in Canada. His papers and books were later donated by his family to the University of Western Ontario. The Beatrice Hitchins Memorial Collection of Aviation History is now available for generations of aviation historians to follow. Professor Hitchins retired in 1970 and pursued many interests equaling the passion he reserved for history. He spent much time with his family, and his photo albums show him as an accomplished photographer. He adored his grandchildren and spent many happy vacations at the lakeside cottage where he could relax with crossword puzzles and books. He also enjoyed traveling in Canada, visiting historical sites along the way. Fred Hitchins died in London on November 3, 1972. This brilliant, modest, unassuming man never sought any reputation or recognition for himself, and the importance of his work has not diminished. Fred Harvey Hitchins was inducted as a member of Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame at ceremonies held in Ottawa on June 6, 2007.